Overclassification undermines critical democratic objectives, such as increasing transparency to promote an informed citizenry and greater accountability.
That was the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, talking about the dangers of government overclassification in January. J. William Leonard formerly served as the Director of the Information Security Oversight Office at the National Archives. Bill, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mimi.
So who makes the decisions as to what gets classified and what gets declassified?
Well, interestingly enough, even though there's millions of people in the government with a security clearance, there's really only a handful, several thousand, who have what's known as original classification authority. Those individuals designated usually by position have the authority to actually determine what is classified information. Anyone then with a security clearance who then uses that same information in another product, another document, or what have you, they're obligated to carry forward that classification decision, and that's known as derivative classification.
So how does, sorry, I was going to ask you, how does declassification work?
So normally, a data or event is established when information is originally classified. A data or event is established, at which point it will become declassified. If a data or event is not known at that time, then it'll be up to the original classifier or whoever assumes that authority at some future date to determine when that information can become declassified.
So can you put the numbers into perspective for us about how many classified documents are there?
Well, I think nowadays, in the age of computers and what have you, I'm not too sure anyone really knows at this point in time, and that's part of the problem. When I headed up the Information Security Oversight Office, we attempted to try to track the number of classification decisions, both original and derivative, and report on them manually. It's become impossible to do that now because, quite frankly, there is just too much classified information within the government, and it's so easy to replicate it on computers, on printers, and what have you. It's a near impossible task.
And there's also something called classified spillage, which I would imagine is relatively easy for that to happen.
Yes, that's a situation where normally, erroneously, or due to inattention, someone can introduce classified information, for example, into an unclassified email system or onto an unclassified computer. And that can cause all sorts of problems then in terms of attempting to remove that classified information from the email system and to scrub it and what have you.
So now that we're well into the digital age, how do you think the classification system needs to be updated and reformed?
That is the number one challenge that we have today. The classification system we work with today is really a product of World War II. It grew out of the Manhattan Project. And it really has not changed significantly in the 80 some odd years since then. And the ability to create and replicate and store and produce information has been revolutionized, obviously, in the intervening decades, but yet the system we have for classification has not caught up. That is, I think, the single biggest contributor as to why the sheer volume of classified information has, quite frankly, gotten out of control, as we've seen in the recent news. It's even though our most senior leaders have a difficulty keeping track of the classified secrets.
And what do you think are the impacts of overclassification on the federal government, on the perception of the government?
There's two impacts. Number one, the challenge is that there truly is exceedingly sensitive information that requires to be closely held. And the problem is when you introduce into the system and intended to protect that very sensitive information, when you introduce less sensitive information, it degrades the value, it degrades the importance of that classification marking, and individuals then make their own determination in terms of what's truly sensitive and what's not. The other challenge, though, is that when you have information introduced into the classification system, you automatically restrict the dissemination of that information further within the government. And that ultimately leads, when you think about it, to imperfect decisions that are being made, because when you classified input or you classify the decision-making process, you're cutting yourself off from alternate sources of information, which almost invariably lead to faulty decisions. The early history of this, the 21st century, with the controversies about leading up to the war in Iraq and bin Laden determined to strike in the U.S. Imagine if that document had become known to the general public before September 11th. History as we know it would, quite frankly, be very different today.
And Bill, what role does the National Archives play in document classification, specifically the role of the Information Security Oversight Office?
That office, which I headed in the George W. Bush administration, has the responsibility to oversee the entire executive branch-wide system for classifying and declassifying information. It's a relatively small office with a relatively small staff, but it has significant authority in terms of overseeing agency actions and compliance with the president's direction, which is set forth in an executive order.
All right. Well, sorry.
Because that's ultimately what classifiers do. They are exercising the president's authority when they classify information. And so it's very important to ensure that that authority, that delegated authority, is properly used.
All right, Bill, thanks so much for joining us on the program.
My pleasure, Mimi.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any future Government Matters interviews.